Oh, it's preparing to live stream the meeting. Oh.
Now you
There we go. Oh, hopefully that, oh, there we go. Meeting is now streaming live. Okay, good. Whew, it took me to a different page, so I wasn't sure if it was doing it right, but I think it is.
don't tell me your problems. I'm no use whatsoever.
Yeah, no, okay. All good. We're fine. It's all good. It is very straightforward. Todd just needed to tell me what to do.
I'm going to lean on you quite heavily. You're trying to work out this.
Great. Okay, well, I do Zoom.
Aren't you thrilled?
Oh, yeah. I do Zoom frequently. In fact, I lead a game morning with my mom and aunties every Monday morning, so I'm pretty familiar with Zoom, but oh, and our women's weekends, we Zoom for that as well. So I have more than no knowledge.
So are you getting the things I like about heaven screen?
You betcha.
So everybody's getting that. Okay. So how do I get pictures on the side?
So if you go up to the view box, click on that.
Gallery.
Yeah, the side-by-side gallery should be the one where it would give you everybody on the side. Now, yeah, there you go.
It's not appearing on my second screen.
I'm not accustomed to working.
So you're getting the screen things I like about heaven?
Yes, I am.
Okay, but there's no people on it.
Mine I do because
can see the people.
We're not going to see your view of people. We're each going to see our own view of people. So I was able to move people from the top to the side. It's
okay. So you can see. So you can see the other participants.
Correct.
But can everyone see the other participants? Oh, hi, Julian.
It's up to everybody to set it for themselves. Julian says yes.
Yep, that's right.
You can go up at the side. Top right says view. That gives you gallery.
I can't get it to work. Yeah, we just tried that. Really? But thanks for the support.
And there's an arrow top and an arrow bottom.
Yeah, right. So if you do standard, Martin, would that give you the people across the top? Or do you not see people at all?
Well, it is part of the problem, as Julian says, is it's full screen. I'm not... It's a full... I'm running 2 monitors. So one of them has the full screen on it. Anyway, we'll get started. Okay. Things I like about heavens. So you should all be seeing that on the screen now. Yeah. And I've got things that others don't. So the reason that I began this, the reason that I decided to choose this is because I was doing a study of heaven and hell, and in the process of trying to order some copies of Shorter Heaven and Hell, which I was looking at the copy that Julian and Trevor produced a number of years ago, and then the new copy that is probably they probably got the inspiration from Julian and Dan Trevor's book, but this came out of the Swedenborg Foundation. And so what I decided to do was to do a seminar on the things going through what heaven is like. So I'm also going to include during this seminar things that I find people in mainstream Christianity, that is people outside the new church who are in the Christian church, struggle with. Like, for example, marriage in heaven and things like that. And hopefully I will, I'll get onto that a little bit as we go. So we become angels when we die. Can everybody see the picture of the angels?
Yeah.
Good. So this is an issue, obviously, for mainstream Christians, because they don't accept that we become angels. They have this very fancy, complex narrative about how angels were a separate creation and fell and became demons and angels and all as sort of separate creatures. So when you're talking to Christians outside the new church, you have to keep this in mind. It's quite a difficult one for them, the idea of becoming angels. For us within the new church, of course, it simplifies so much. It's crazy ridiculous how simplified the complex issue of angels and who they were and how they got saved, because, well, theoretically, angels obviously fell. That's how they became demons. So how then did they get, redeemed somehow? None of that, of course, is available to.
They came from other worlds, you see, so they were already far in advance and didn't need to go through our process. So they're the angels and we're people who become spirits.
That sounds a bit like the discussion we're having this morning with aliens. Same sort of thing happened, really, didn't it?
Yep.
They didn't need to go. They haven't needed to go through the same things. Yeah. So as I mentioned this morning, I have a little bit of difficulty with that. But thanks for adding that in, Julian. And feel free, anybody, to make a comment as we go. So when do we? Sorry, did someone say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add. I came across a place in Swedenborg once where it said that, the idea of people, angels, are simply people who lived in this world and lived a good life. Swedenborg said that at that time was completely unknown. Entirely unknown. The belief of everybody in the Christian religion was that angels were a separate race of beings.
Yeah,
it was a totally revolutionary idea that angels should actually be people who have kind of graduated to the spiritual world.
Yeah. So are you saying that, which is something I've noticed, that non-Christians have much less problem with the idea of becoming an angel after you die?
They do nowadays, yeah. Maybe because of the movie It's a Wonderful Life, an American movie that was made in the 40s, I think, which actually it was written by somebody who may very well have had an understanding of Swedenborg's ideas. But it's a movie that gets played every Thanksgiving. Back in the 70s, a clerical mistake meant that it came into the public domain. So all the TV stations play it as a kind of a combined Christmas and Thanksgiving offering every year, and everybody traditionally watches this really beautiful, well-loved movie, which has this bumbling apprentice angel in it.
Yeah. So here's a question.
Somebody's newly died, and I think this maybe is actually formed a lot of the popular culture.
Yeah. So here's a question. Wayne. When do we become angels?
When do we become angels?
Yeah.
On entering heaven, I suppose.
Okay. Anybody else disagree with that?
Well, yeah, when you become, the word become is a curious word to use because there's potential, there are angelic moments in this life, and there are eventual heavenly fullnesses and so on. I think it's a question that we can't really answer.
Okay. So Swedenborg had a little friend, a girl in his age, during his life, who asked him to show her an angel, because she knew that he talked about angels and talked to angels. And so he promised one day that he would show her an angel. And of course, probably you've heard the story. He covered a mirror and brought her in and took the covering off the mirror and then said to her, "See that little girl in the mirror?" He said, "That's an angel." And his point was that she was already an angel. She was, even while she was living in this world, she was already an angel. And and that we actually become angels when we begin the regeneration process in our life, and that we are turned. The writings say we are turned from heading towards hell to heading towards heaven. So that was an interesting idea. I think that's quite a radical idea that a lot of people probably struggle with. Any comments on that?
I'm happy to comment on that, and that is just that I, from a personal experience perspective, not a theological perspective, I feel that I have seen more than one angel manifest in this world in the goodness and love shown by another. And
it's very nice.
For me, that has generally come up in times of trouble, like, you know, in palliative care centers.
Yeah.
In you know, traumatic circumstances, car accidents, fires, things like that, where the best in people is drawn out. And that I think that is consistent with what you were saying.
Yeah.
To the extent that we are in an angelic state in this world, we are, at least in the moment, angels.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for that, Howard. Many people just believe that just angels just play harps and sing all day. What does Swedenborg tell us about this? When we move from the natural world into the spiritual, we take with us everything except our earthly body. In fact, but we are in a body as we were in this world. There seems to be no difference. When anything spiritual touches, it is just like something natural touching. We have no sense that we are not in the body. We inhabit the world, and therefore we do not realize that we have died. As spirit people, we enjoy every outer and inner sense we enjoyed in the world. We see the way we used to. We hear the talk with the way we used to. We smell and taste and feel things when we touch them the way we used to. We want, wish, crave, think, ponder, are moved, love, and intend the way we used to. When we move from one life to the other, or from one world into the other, it is like moving from one physical place to another. We take with us everything we owned as persons, to the point that it would be unfair to say that we have lost anything of our own after death, which is only a death of the earthly body. Heaven and Hell, number 461. What does Swedenborg tell us is the most difficult thing to believe when we get to heaven?
That
We've died.
That's right, that we've already died. Okay. What kind of bodies do we have when we get to heaven? People who do not know anything about the spiritual world and its inflow into the natural world cannot grasp the fact that angels have bodies. Okay, so I've jumped ahead a bit. So now we're talking about what kind of bodies we have, as the passages we're talking about human bodies that are exactly the same. Okay, angels also have power. In the spiritual world, we find that as a result, heaven and hell 22:8 to 228. People don't think of angels as being physical or as having power, because they think of them as being insubstantial. They think angels cannot have power because they are spiritual and pure and insubstantial. They cannot even be seen by our eyes. But Swedenborg shares with us.
Disembodied thoughts is the idea, because the spirit is vacuous in this life. It's insubstantial in appearance. And therefore, if your body dies, the thought is that you can only be a disembodied thought.
Yes.
That's the logic.
They can't get their head around having a physical body.
No.
Or a physical presence, because angels, the power of angels requires a physical presence, doesn't it, as well? Swedenborg shares his experience in the spiritual world. I've seen mountains leveled and overturned and cliffs split down the middle, right to the bottom. And he's seen all of these things take place as angels have attempted to bring order to the spiritual world, or the world of spirits. That is the world before people go to their separate places, their separate eternities. Then Swedenborg goes on to talk about how angels actually can influence us in a very specific, very intimate way. I've been shown how angels have been allowed to activate my walking, my actions, my tongue, my conversation as they wished, by flowing into my intention and thinking. And I learned firsthand how I could do nothing on my own. They told me later that everybody is governed in this way. And we, of course, actually often pray things like this. We pray that God will send his angels to lead us, guide our steps, teach us, and inspire us as to what we should think and say, and so on. One little personal experience that I'll add to this is that sometimes I have seen Christians take on a kind of powerful ability to influence. In Pentecostal churches, they call it an anointing. Christians seem to be very convincing, not in a bad way, but it seemed to have a kind of blessing come over them in their ministry. And I think that this is actually a proof of what Swedenborg's saying here, how angels can temporarily take over a Christian and do things through them. The problem comes when, of course, we seek for that experience all the time, 100% of the time. And that's not what it's for. And people can cause themselves a lot of harm by trying to do that. Okay, then we move on to marriage and sex. There is marriage and sex in heaven. I hope nobody's offended by this picture. The other ones that I had to choose from were much worse. People obviously out there in the world have a very fantasy view of angels in heaven. But it's interesting to ask questions about what sex or gender do angels have? Why might people be divided into male and female? Why do you think God made us so different? If we are married in heaven, how would our marriage be different than it is on earth? So Swedenborg addresses a number of these in the following numbers. Men and women are endowed with intellect and volition. For men, intellect tends to take the lead, while for women, it is volition. Does anybody have another word for volition?
Will.
Will, okay. So possibly a touch more active than will. We talk about our employment often as our volition, or our. So I think probably it leans a little bit more towards that. But thank you for the alternative anyway. So then we go on. The intent of the wife actually enters into the thinking of her husband, and the thinking of the husband enters into the intent of the wife. Now, he's talking here about marriage in heaven, and how much perfect it is. Everybody in heaven knows the two spouses who love each other are intimately united, and the essence of marriage is the unit of spirits and minds. We can also see, though, as I said before, about when we become an angel, there is this process, or at least we get glimpses of it, I think, in our earthly marriage. I've also been allowed to see how marriages are entered into in the heavens. Throughout heaven, people who are similar gather together, like are drawn to like, not by their own will, but by the Lord. So we can actually say that you can fall in love at first sight in heaven. So in first sight, we can love each other most deeply, because heaven is very much the work of the Lord. Marriage is very much the work of the Lord in heaven. A couple of other points to make. Although there is sex in heaven, there are no births in heaven, because children, even though children, even down to the age of babies, also exist in heaven, there is no births, actual births in heaven. In Heaven and Hell 382, Swedenborg tells us that births, the creation of a baby and the birth of a baby does not take place in heaven. It only takes place in this world.
And
earth.
I would add to that the fact that after the menopause, you're not having sex to create new babies. You're actually having sex because of your devotion, appreciation, togetherness, one with the other, which is, I think, towards the heavenly idea of what sex is for.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks for that. I think it's a nice idea also that perhaps for the first time in history, people have been able to talk about the delight of sex without having everyone around them saying, oh no, sex has only one purpose, and that's to bring babies into the world, which is something that I think in past generations, people have tended to over-focus on, that sex has that singular role. I don't know whether other people have heard it, but I've certainly heard it from people that sex has only one role, and that is the creation of the next generation. So I think that's a nice benefit of living in our present age, in our present generation. Now, of course, one of the things that you will have trouble with people in other churches is that there's a passage which you probably all heard of, where Jesus says there is neither marriage nor giving in marriage in heaven, but we are like the angels, which is an interesting comment that everybody misses, of course. But so Christians outside the new church will struggle hugely with the idea that there is marriage in heaven. I'm not quite sure why that's so strong, and they will take this verse and they will really try and use it as a shield against what you're saying to them. Of course, if you read Swedenborg on this particular passage, which is the only one that's really that's really talked about in the Bible as far as marriage in heaven is concerned. If you read what Swedenborg says that basically the Lord is talking about not so much physical marriage, but the marriage of good and truth in heaven, or what mainstream Christians, what Christians outside the new church will call the marriage supper of the Lamb. And this is a kind of apocryphal theology, which is a theology from Revelation, which is at the end of time. The Lord's marriage, in the Lord's marriage, we will be brought together with him. But also, as Swedenborg points out, it's the beginning of the regeneration process, or the ongoing regeneration process in our lives. So this is something that you could talk about when it comes to the idea of that passage, and if you're forced into a situation where you have to try and answer.
Just had a couple of points there, Matthew. Please, Martin.
Yeah.
First of all, these, I understand the resistance amongst mainstream Christians, but conversely, those same people will happily, at the death of a grandma or a grandpa, they'll happily say, reunited with grandpa or whatever. So it's strange that intuitively, not strange, but intuitively, the gender integrity of the departed is upheld in that sort of way. The second point I want to make is that I don't know whether it helps or not. I'm still, with me, the jury is still a little bit out, but John Chadwick did a translation of Conjugal Love about 20 or more years ago, and he as I think you all know, he was an outstanding world-class Greek scholar, and he makes the point in his introduction to his translation of Conjugal Love that the word, there is no, Jesus saying they are neither married nor given a marriage. He said, no, that's wrong. It's about weddings. The Greek is about weddings. There are no weddings in heaven. Now that is doctrinally sound because, going back to the beginning of your talk, when do we become an angel? Well, I know we've aired that, but we only enter into heaven. I know you can quibble about the edges of this, but we only enter into heaven in the fullness of a marriage relationship. The weddings have already taken place. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ian. I must say that in my own theology, I'm constantly brought back to the connection between marriage and regeneration, or marriage and becoming a Christian and the Christian life. It's very, very strong in the writings.
Yes, it is.
And it's repeated over and over and over again. And I think that our understanding of that concept of the connection between marriage and a heavenly life, or marriage in the kingdom of God, if you like,
yes,
will only improve as our own marriages,
indeed,
improve, and that one affects the other.
I think the quote is they walk hand in hand, one strengthening the other.
Yeah.
As one progresses in your marriage, one progresses in your regeneration, and vice versa.
Nice way of putting it, Howard. Thanks for that.
Yes.
What happens then? Can I ask what happens then to single people who would want to be married? Does the Lord find a partner for them?
Yes, he absolutely does. I can't give you a quote for that, but I can certainly find one and send it to you if you like. Yes, he certainly, everybody, in fact, it gets into a little bit more tricky what happens with partners who were married in this life, but then when they get to heaven don't want to be married anymore. And we are even informed that the Lord takes that into hand and finds a new partner for both partners with whom they're happy with. So,
and says often that the previously married couple, seeing each other more completely, separate as good friends.
Yeah, that's nice.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. What is the source of beauty in heaven? Genuine married love is found in the inmost heaven because the angels there are absorbed in the marriage of good and truth and are in innocence as well. Marriage love is a state of innocence. So between partners who are in marriage love, there are heavenly pleasures, almost like games of innocence in their minds. Can everyone see that picture? It's just as a contrast to the previous one. Couldn't resist it.
It's a very heavenly state.
Yeah.
He uses somewhere in Conjugal Love, in one of the chapters, he uses the word teasing.
Yeah.
And he says that teasing is a kind of backhanded compliment,
Yeah.
between partners. It's
Yeah.
a genuine affection.
Yeah, well, that's used. You see that used all the time. I'm always fascinated when I'm in a large group of men on how they kind of lamblast each other, and it's a bit like the relationship between Howard and Tom. You know, they're constantly saying nasty things about each other, but you know they don't mean it.
I'm talking about husband and wife.
Yeah, I see that, William. Thank you for that. Indeed. Okay. Where did I get this from? We don't have to suffer fools in heaven. Different communities, different kingdoms. Basically, we are not sent by God, but we take ourselves to different parts of heaven. And also those who don't want to be in heaven at all take themselves out of heaven in what eventually turns out to be hell. But the writings also tell us that to those who live in hell, it is not like the classical pictures that we get of hell, fire and brimstone and pain and agony, or at least only to the extent that people bring it on themselves. But basically, there is sometimes, if you get really worn out by having to deal with people who attack you because you're a Christian or because you're in the new church, it's a comfort to know that when you get to heaven, you'll not have to put up with this anymore. While it may be good for you in this life, it's certainly not good for you in heaven. So that's a nice thing to have as a favorite for what I like about heaven. Dream homes in heaven. Houses and locations in heaven are according to affection. In Heaven and Hell 183, it tells us that since there are communities in heaven with people living there the way we do, they too have homes, and these vary depending on the state of life of each individual. They are splendid for people who are in one state and less splendid for people who are in another state. That might not be your piece of cake for a home in heaven. You might like prefer something like this.
Lemon squeezy.
That's what this is what my wife would desire to live in heaven. She's made very clear to me. And when we went to England, one of the things we liked to do was travel around and look at some of these amazing cottages, thatched roof cottages that they have in heaven. So essentially, going back to the first point about what angels are like in heaven, angels have a human form and have homes that can be called heavenly dwellings, which are more splendid than earthly dwellings. And of course, you can truly call them dream homes because the home that you live in will be taken from that which most you dream about or most wish for, if you like, in this life as a place to live. And that's something certainly to look forward to. Of course, dealing with Christians outside the new church, one of the verses that they cling to, they have much less verses to cling to about heaven than we have, which is kind of sad in a way. One of the verses that they cling to is where the Lord says to his disciples, I go to prepare a place for you, a mansion, as it were. So even they dream about having dream houses in heaven.
But still, there's this common fantasy that heaven's up there in the clouds. It's not a down to earth impure kind of place. So you're up there on the pristine clouds, and even if you have kind of an angel body with your harp and robes sitting on the cloud, you're still above that level. So that's the common kind of idea in our culture. So the idea that there's going to be houses at all is a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, the fundamental fallacy of what heaven is with so many people is it is only never-ending worship of God.
Yeah.
No, that's all it is. It's total church, endless church. And of course, at the beginning of Conjugal Love, Swedenborg deals with that. But I think that guides this kind of disembodiment and, you know, nothing physical, no sex. It's all endless worship of God. That's what heaven is.
Yeah.
Everything's pure and elevated.
Yeah. And in Heaven and Hell at 183, it says, I've talked to the angels about homes in heaven, telling them that nowadays hardly anyone would believe that they have homes and houses, because they believe that the angelic heaven is the sky they see above them with their eyes. Since it appears to be empty, they think that angels are ethereal forms. They come to the conclusion that angels live in the atmosphere. Angels have told me, Swedenborg says, that they're aware of this kind of ignorance, but that people could know from the word that angels have been seen as people. And as people, they have houses and homes and do not fly around in the air. Even though they're called spirits, they are not breezes. Then in the Conjugal Love, 137, a man gave me his right hand and took me to their homes where there were married couples in the prime of life. Their wives, who now looked like young women, had been aged and bent in the world, and husbands who now looked like young men, all in heaven. And Julian, taking up, that's kind of my next point, is we don't constantly go to church in heaven. In True Christian Religion, 695, most people these days who believe in life after death think that in heaven all of their thoughts will be of a devotional nature. All their words will be prayers. They will combine these thoughts and words with facial expressions and physical actions in pure, endless glorification of God. Their homes will therefore be all sacred buildings, houses of worships, and they will all be priests of God. So basically, they're thinking in terms of people living in temples in heaven. And Swedenborg goes on to state, I can attest that while church devotions take place in heaven, people live in their own homes and have their own work. Dream jobs, which is our next subject, dream jobs. In Conjugal Love 207, when we first came here, we heard that in heaven there are administrations, ministries, employment, businesses, studies, in all kinds of learning and wonderful works. And yet we believe that from the natural to the spiritual world, we should come into eternal rest from our labors. And of course, the Bible does say that we will enter into an eternal rest, but it's not a rest as in lying down and going to sleep. It's a rest as in a lack of restlessness. I have another quote here, the TCR 694, study or work excites our mind, brings it to life and gives it delight. This effect is produced by the usefulness that is the basis, the context, and the purpose of our work. For this reason, the Lord regards the entirety of heaven as a place for usefulness. And it's interesting, when I was going through pictures of jobs, potential jobs in heaven, I thought about things like some things like maybe doctors who deal with sick people, and maybe builders who construct homes. Maybe some of those jobs actually won't be in heaven because they're not needed. But then other jobs like one of the pictures I looked at was becoming a movie star, or obviously an artist, or a sculptor, or a traveler of some sort, probably are in heaven and are actual jobs in heaven.
Martin, I would also add that there are jobs we can't even conceive of.
I think that's absolutely true. Another thing I think, just to add to that, Howard, is that there are jobs that exist today that did not exist as little as 20 or 30 years ago. And I often think about the idea, which is quite dear to my heart, of heaven, what I call percolating down into this world. And I often think that some of these new jobs that are being created are like that. They're heaven kind of percolating down into this world, and you know, what is it? The Lord's I think it is the Lord's Prayer. Make this world more like it is in heaven. Something along those lines.
As
Anyway.
on earth, as in heaven, so upon the earth.
As in heaven, so upon the earth. Thank you, Julian. Yeah. Okay, then my next point is our favorite pets return to us in heaven. Now, this is an interesting one because I've always sensed that this is true, and I have actually had people actually ask me about whether their pets, whether they will see their pets in heaven. It's obviously something that quite a few people, I would say, feel quite deeply about. But I actually needed a bit of help to find a paragraph, and Julian came to the rescue for me and gave me this paragraph. In the spiritual world is the same as in the natural world. Beasts of every kind and birds of every kind, fishes of every kind are to be seen, and so like in form that they cannot be distinguished from those in our world. But there is this difference, that in the spiritual world they spring evidently from the affections of angels and spirits, so that they are affections made apparent, and consequently they disappear as soon as the angel or spirit departs, or his affection ceases. And one of the things that this makes me think about is movies like I mentioned it to the ministers, dog movies, you know, where a dog will come into a person's life and make a change in that life. One recent one that I saw was simply called The Dog, I think it was called, or Dog, about a guy who had been in the army and had a dog that was a bomb sniffer, and then the guy had died, and his friend believed that he needed to pick up this dog and take the dog to the guy's funeral. Unfortunately, the dog was so angry at the loss of its master that this guy went through a whole relational experience with this dog, trying to do what he originally could only think of being unthinkable, of humbling himself before this animal and trying to build a relationship with this very ornery and very uptight dog. And in fact, there are an amazing number of movies. There's a couple made in Australia called Red Dog, which are well worth watching if you get the chance, which take a very similar theme, or what today we would call trope. And one of the things that, while I was thinking about this thing and putting it together, I had this kind of revelation, which is that the Lord actually comes into this animal and teaches us through this animal, sometimes even because it's the only thing that is strong enough to draw our affection, to keep us focused on particular issues in our lives. And the Lord uses our affection or our love for this animal to teach us things through it. And then while I was thinking of that, I realized, well, yeah, in heaven, it's exactly the same. The Lord, yes, the animal is drawn to us, and it may in fact be a pet that we had in this life. But at the same time, the Lord works through this animal in heaven, and that's where that passage comes out, talks about our affection animating this animal, but then when our affection, as it were, has been satisfied, or our love and the animal is no longer required, the animal goes away. And we don't even have to see this in kind of mechanical terms in these movies. It's amazing how these animals just kind of walk into town. And I can imagine living in a house where this animal that I had when I was a child just turns up on my doorstep, and spends time with me and teaches me things. And then after a while, when I have learned the things the animal teaches me, he then wanders away again. And I had this lovely revelation of how it might work in heaven and how it sometimes works on earth. There's a wonderful book called The Incredible Journey. Some of you may have heard of it, of 3 animals who get lost from their owner and who go on this long journey across Canada. Jen will know of it, I'm sure. But yeah, they go this in order to get back to their master, who happens to be, I believe, a little boy. But anyway, it's just one of many stories about animals' interaction with people, both in this world and in the next.
Well, hey, Martin, I think a lot of people have difficulty with the idea that it won't necessarily be their pet that went to heaven, in the same way that, oh, well, if Martin and I go to heaven, I'll see Martin there. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not like I'm seeing my pet.
Yeah.
I'm seeing an expression of an affection that I have that pet represents.
Yeah.
Jeremy Simmons from the GC in the States had a great way of putting it, and he's a big pet person.
Yeah, I know Jeremy. Yeah.
He says dogs don't go to heaven.
Yeah.
But there will be dogs there when I get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I would go so far as to say my dog
it's
will be there when I get there, even though dogs.
It's an expression of your affection. So
yeah, and I totally agree with everything you said, Howard. It's all absolutely true. But I think I'd like to add to that to the same degree that we have difficulty believing that we will be the same in heaven as we are now, we also have difficulty believing that a pet that comes to us in heaven will be just as real to us as it was in this world. That's what I feel.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll build on what Ian was saying earlier. In talking with people, even people who have a traditional foundation or a foundation in traditional Christianity, there's an innate understanding that love transcends our physical lives. So the doctrine they study might specifically say, there's no marriage in heaven. We'll all be kind of these unisex beings, with no relationships because we're all praising God. They're going to say, are you kidding me? We've been married for 40 years. Of course I'm going to see my wife after I pass. So there's that innate understanding, and I think that the affection represented by the pets is almost on that same level. It's a level of love, and that transcends our physical lives.
Yeah, that's a good point, Howard. I have to be honest though, in all my dealings, and it's probably something to do with the churches and the Christians that I have associated with. In all my dealings, only one mainstream Christian, as I call them, ever asked me without resorting to the verses and struggle with the idea of being married in heaven. And that was my 80-year-old grandmother who was sitting at a table with me just after lunch. And I mentioned, I'm not sure how it came up, but I mentioned that I believe that there was marriage in heaven. And she looked at me in the way that only an older woman can do. And she said to me, "Do you really believe that there's marriage in heaven?" And I swallowed and I said, "Yes, I do." And she looked at me for a few moments more, and then she just moved on to something else, or just looked downward quietly. And she's the only person that's ever just accepted that. And I think she did accept it. Her husband had been dead for about 5 or 6 years at that point. But that's the only time that I can say to you, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the problem is. Well, I kind of do, because I remember how I thought about it when I was a youth. But yeah, there's definitely an issue there. But I hope, Howard, that we all meet more people who are more open-minded to this concept.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I think one of the difficulties people have is because they're over physicalizing, solidity of this life as sensual, and when we die, that's taken away from us, you see.
Yeah.
When in fact, this life that you and I and we are now living is predominantly spiritual, and it has physical and sensual appendages to it. But in balance and in reality, we're living, all of us, who believers or no believers, atheists or whatever, are living primarily spiritual lives now.
Yes. Yes.
And once you realize that, I think
Yes.
a lot of the difficulty of what it's going to be like in the afterlife just goes.
Yeah. I have a favorite quote, which is at the end of all my emails. It says, "We are not so much human beings having a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience."
Exactly. Okay.
Final point, time travel in heaven. Didn't know there was time travel in heaven, did you? Got pictures there of various movies and other things. Time travel. I've got this quote from Conjugal Love. "But I perceive," this is Swedenborg talking about his journeys in the spiritual world, "but I perceive that you are not fully in this world because you are at the same time in the natural world." This was a spiritual being talking to Swedenborg. "So he took me to a place on the border between the north and the east. And when I had a view in that direction from a piece of high ground, I caught sight of a city. This city," he told me, "is called Athenium, because it is in this city and its neighborhood the wise men of ancient Greece live." And I asked about Plato and Aristotle, and he told me that they and their followers were in a different region because they had taught about reasonings purely intellectual, but the others about moral issues relevant to the conduct of life. So here is Swedenborg literally being taken, not so much back in time, but in some respects even better, to that time period where people still exist, with all of the attitudes and mental dilemmas and understandings that they had from that period of time. It's an interesting thing that when you read time travel books, and I have read quite a few of them in my time, one of the things they always tend to focus on is people coming from the future, going back into the past and bringing things they knew about in their own time to talk to the people in the past or in history that they go back to. And I think that this is a fantasy, because I think that actually you would find it enormously difficult to convince people in the past, not only of the things that you knew and of things that you experienced in an everyday matter, but also even more so, find it impossible to convince those people, even when it came to their own health or their ways of governing or their philosophy or anything else, to change in any way. And yet science fiction authors take great delight. Took another series, another trope or another genre of books I read are called alternative histories. And they're about large groups of people go back from this time to a previous time and manage to stop people fighting and bring improve their health and bring their technology up to a point. They don't, of course, introduce modern weapon technology, but they introduce all sorts of different helpful technologies. But yeah, I genuinely believe that so many of these time travel stories are very feel good, but quite unlikely.
It would be, if it was so, it would be disorderly.
Yes.
Like communication with spirits is disorderly from our end, you see. So to go back into a previous time with intentions, I think would be against the order of individual and collective communities. And it would be an aberration of how it's meant to be.
Another thing that's occurred to me is that our world is very much in sync, and it may be even limited to a degree to the progress that in heaven. And the spirits that we are relating to are spirits that exist in heaven but may not have existed thousands of years ago. So you would also possibly be working up against that resistance, which would be almost impossible to overcome, of a world that was governed by literally a different heaven. Another example that Swedenborg talks about in Conjugal Love, the third experience. Next day, my angel guide and companion came again and said, "Get ready so that we can visit the inhabitants of heaven in the west, who are some of the people who lived in the third or copper age." We entered their heaven in its southern side, and there we found a magnificent wood. So Swedenborg wasn't limited just to the ancient Greeks. He could go back even further than that into the copper, perhaps even into the Stone Age. Of course, bearing in mind, as I said before, that the further you go back, the more difficult it would be for you to relate to the people who lived there. And my final comment is there a future in heaven? Now, as far as I know, Swedenborg never talks about this, but you've probably all heard of Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. What you may not know is that Raymond Moody's book was basically, the idea was initiated by a previous person, George Ritchie, who was one of Raymond Moody's patients, who actually wrote a book called Return from Tomorrow. And in this book, apart from going into heaven or into the world of spirits, he promoted the idea that he was shown inventions that had not yet entered our world. And he literally says this, I was taken to research institutions which were developing these new inventions and new ideas. And at a certain point, that people would be selected in our world to bring these new ideas into the experience of people in the natural world. So yeah, that's a bit of an eye opener. So that's the end of my talk, and we're pretty much exactly on 3 o'clock, or 3 minutes past actually. So if there's anybody, does anybody have any questions or further discussions that they would like to add?
Yeah, I'll just add, Martin, that I really appreciate the reflection on houses in heaven. It's funny, years ago, I think I remember how excited I was that I could buy a house that was bigger than the last one I had. And now I would just love to live in the most understated of the Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian home.
A man after my own heart, Howard.
with very simple built-in furniture, simple lines, no rooms you didn't need.
I'd actually like to live in a green.
The Roseville Manse is not your place then, Howard. Can I tell a funny story?
And then the funny thing is that also takes my mind to think that, well, it's really not about the house, it's about what happens in the house.
Yeah.
Sure.
I actually think I'd like to live in a greenhouse, surrounded by plants. And of course, climate controlled as well.
Of course. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'll tell this funny house story. A couple who shall remain nameless, we visited them, that's Neville Jarvis and I, and they had moved in their 80s from a medium-sized house to a large house. And we went to visit them in their next house, which was almost twice as big as the one that they had lived in and brought up their kids. And I said to them, why on earth at your age are you moving from a smaller house to a bigger house? And she said to me, so that he can be at one end and I can be at the other.
There's a funny joke about big houses, and that with modern homes, the house gets bigger and the garden gets smaller. So for traditional roles, the wife looks after the inside and the husband looks after the outside. Men have won again. Except, of course, a lot more men do housework these days. That's something to be grateful for.
Thank you very much, Martin.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Thanks,
turning up.
Martin.
Nice,
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
nice coverage.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Right.
Ian.
Yeah.
Can I add something just very briefly to
Yes,
Julian for yesterday's? I listened to it after the fact, but
Yes.
Julian, it occurred to me when you were talking about writing how it involves the whole body.
Mhm.
You know, it's every sense. When we write, we're thinking about the words we're choosing to accurately say what we mean. I mean, how many times do we go rewrite it because it doesn't make sense, because we've chosen the wrong word? That's not exactly what I mean. You know, you can keep rewriting it. So all your senses are in touch when you're physically writing something. Your mind, your
Yes, nice
your
point.
emotions, everything.
Yes, a nice point. And that
Not quite as good as a keyboard, do you think?
what kind of keyboard? Music board. Okay.
Any kind.
I often say to people that I know that my great hatred in life is autocorrect.
It can be very annoying. It's
Yes.
true.
Not for that, but the very fact that it exists
Yeah, you should know it.
away from my seeing, realizing, changing, and wish that I hadn't made such a mistake.
I have a grammar checker on mine, and that's even more annoying.
Well, especially when it's American, and I refused to say R is better than OUR. Sorry, Todd and Jen.
No apologies to me. That's okay.
But yeah,
Yes.
I agree. No grammar checker.
Yes,
should
when you
know
see
it.
see a word with a Z in it, you know that it's probably American, and you need to double check it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, Julian. I thought
Thanks,
it was very interesting, and thank you, Martin.
Thank
That
you,
was
Dan.
very interesting. To forgive me lying down like this, but I've had my knee replacement. I have to have my knee higher than my heart.
Whoa,
drain
that-
it,
what
so-
does that correspond to?
Yes, yeah. It's turning the world upside down, isn't it? I don't know
Very
if my
good.
head's in heaven or hell at the moment.
Oh dear.
Anyway, on that happy note, thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
Good healing
Wonderful.
wishes.
There you go.
Bye, Ian.
Bye now, Gary.